With those tiny hands, you probably can't even open a peanut butter jar. The words came sharp and loud from Brigadier General Samuel Barrett inside Wilmington Crest Air Base's elite training hangar. 8-year-old Charlotte Monroe had just stepped forward, offering to unlock a jammed cockpit that had grounded a multi-million-dollar training operation. Minutes later, her quiet confidence and technical brilliance stunned every officer present, rewriting procedures and shaking the very foundation of military protocol. This heartwarming story of humility, hidden genius, and one little girl's life-changing moment is more than just a headline. It's an inspirational story about how small hands can have a big impact, even in the most rigid corners of the armed forces. But first, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our amazing community from around the world. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. The Arizona desert shimmered under the early morning sun as Dr. Evelyn Monroe guided her old SUV through the security gates of Wilmington Crest Air Base, a sprawling facility nestled at the edge of a sandstone canyon. At 43, Evelyn was one of the region's most respected neurosurgeons, calm under pressure, practical to a fault, and a widow who had never fully healed from the day her husband, a decorated Air Force pilot, died during a rescue mission overseas. Seated beside her was Charlotte, her curious 8-year-old daughter with big eyes and a quiet strength beyond her years. In the back seat, 13-year-old Hannah absent-mindedly scrolled through her tablet, her earbuds muting the world. Their babysitter had fallen sick that morning, and Evelyn, summoned for an urgent medical consult at the base, had no choice but to bring them along. The base stood as a monument to precision rows of fighter jets, steel hangars, and a sense of order carved into the desert. But behind the polished metal and sharp uniforms was a place where pride often left little room for gentleness. Today, that would be tested, because Charlotte wasn't just here to wait quietly. She was about to change everything. As Dr. Evelyn Monroe disappeared behind the authorized personnel, only doors of the base's medical wing, she gave her daughters one last instruction: stay right here. No wandering. Charlotte nodded obediently, but her gaze had already drifted beyond the waiting room's beige walls and dull chairs. The low hum of machinery, the faint scent of jet fuel, and the distant clanking of metal stirred something inside her, a memory of her father letting her sit in his lap inside a flight simulator, showing her how the cockpit worked like a puzzle box. Minutes passed. Then, through the high windows, Charlotte noticed a group of officers gathering outside a hangar, their movements urgent. The huge sliding doors had been left ajar, and inside sat a grounded fighter jet, its cockpit canopy sealed tight. Curiosity tugged harder than rules. While Hannah was busy watching a video with her headphones in, Charlotte quietly slipped out. Her tiny frame made her nearly invisible as she followed signs pointing toward Hangar 3. Tactical simulations. When she reached the open hangar, the scene inside looked tense. Engineers were clustered around a high-tech training jet. A mechanical failure had locked the canopy shut with an expensive computer core inside that couldn't be accessed. No one could get it open, not even the hydraulic override, and the scheduled demonstration for a visiting general was just minutes away. Brigadier General Samuel Barrett, a towering figure known for his strict discipline and dismissive attitude toward non-operational distractions, stood with arms crossed. A decorated career man in his 50s, he had little patience for anything that wasn't calculated, controlled, and proven. You're telling me this billion-dollar simulator is dead in the water because of a stuck latch he snapped? One of the junior techs mumbled something about software lockouts and fail-safe redundancies. Barrett scoffed. Maybe we should call a kid to fiddle with it. They seem to think they know everything these days. As if on cue, Charlotte stepped into view. The silence that followed was deafening. She stood just inside the threshold, hands clasped behind her back, looking up at the jet. Her voice was soft but confident. "That's a Falcon T-29 trainer, right? My dad flew one. He used to say if the cabin pressure override and the locking pistons jam at the same time, you could trigger a reset using the backup circuit under the rear panel, but only if the panel hasn't been sealed by the emergency shield. Barrett turned. And what would you know about cockpit mechanics, little lady? Charlotte stepped closer. I know that if you bypass the primary solenoid and pulse the auxiliary actuator, the latch might release. My dad showed me that trick when I was 5. Barrett stared in disbelief, then laughed coldly. With those tiny hands, you probably can't even open a peanut butter jar. This isn't some schoolyard science project. The techs exchanged awkward glances. The child clearly struck a nerve. But then Charlotte quietly climbed the maintenance ladder and approached the control bay, her fingers dancing across the emergency panel with surprising certainty. She paused, flipped a hidden switch, held down a recessed button. Then, click, the cockpit hatch hissed and popped open. The room froze. Charlotte stepped down, cheeks flushed, but expression calm. Barrett blinked. Who are you? I'm Charlotte Monroe. My dad was Captain Lucas Monroe. He taught me to respect machines and listen before judging. Barrett said nothing. The silence now was different. Not dismissive, stunned. After the cockpit door unlocked with a sharp hiss. The stunned silence in Hangar 3 was soon broken not by applause, not by celebration, but by the slow, skeptical voice of Brigadier General Samuel Barrett. That was a fluke, he muttered, his tone sharper than before. Luck, a child pressing random buttons. Don't turn this into some feel-good moment. The air in the room shifted. One of the young engineers stepped forward to object, but Charlotte, standing beside the jet with smudges on her hands and curiosity in her eyes, didn't flinch. I didn't press random buttons. Sir, she said softly but clearly, I read the pressure schematics outside the hangar. The error code said auxiliary lock. My dad taught me to troubleshoot, not guess. Barrett stared at her, his pride bruised, his authority challenged by an 8-year-old. The silence was thick again. That's when Colonel Denise Harland, head of base engineering, entered the hangar, clipboard in hand. What's going on here, she asked, scanning the scene-open cockpit, stunned personnel, one small girl standing defiantly on the access platform. Apparently, Barrett sneered, we now train elementary schoolers to solve tech problems our crew can't. Colonel Harland raised an eyebrow. You mean the cockpit opened? Because of her, Barrett emphasized, pointing at Charlotte like she were an inconvenience instead of a miracle. Charlotte stepped down the ladder and stood quietly beside a rack of flight suits. She was used to being overlooked but not ridiculed. Colonel Harland turned to the tech crew. Is this true? The lead technician, a man in his 30s with oil stains on his sleeves and awe in his eyes, nodded. Ma'am, she did what 5 of us couldn't. Identified the error, executed a manual override. Perfectly. Barrett opened his mouth to respond, but Colonel Harland cut him off. General Barrett, maybe what we need around here is less shouting and more listening. Barrett's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being corrected, especially not in front of subordinates. Where's this child's guardian? He asked abruptly. Charlotte, whose calm had started to waver, replied, My mom's a doctor. She's helping with a medical emergency at the base hospital. I was waiting. Barrett looked away. Colonel Harland knelt to Charlotte's level, her voice kind but firm. Sweetheart, you weren't supposed to be in here, but you may have just saved this demonstration. You did good, really good. Just then, another technician burst into the hangar. VIP teams arriving in 20. They're expecting that trainer in the demo loop. Barrett sighed. The stakes were too high now, and like it or not, the little girl had fixed the problem. He looked back at Charlotte not with affection, but with the weary recognition that authority doesn't always equal ability. Get her out of here, he grumbled, before someone gives her a badge and calls her an officer. But before Charlotte was escorted out, she turned back not to the jet, but to the people in the room. And she said something no one expected. "My dad always said, the best soldiers aren't the ones who know everything. They're the ones who never stop learning." Maybe we could all try that today. Colonel Harlan smiled. One of the engineers even clapped softly. "And Barrett?" He said nothing. But as Charlotte walked away, he watched her go, and for the first time in years, he wondered whether his grip on certainty had made him blind to brilliance when it stood right in front of him. The following morning, Brigadier General Samuel Barrett arrived early at Wilmington Crest Air Base, earlier than his aides, earlier than the technicians, earlier even than the janitorial crew who swept the hangars at dawn. He stood alone in Hangar 3 staring at the now functional Falcon T-29 trainer. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above him, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the voice of a little girl who had no rank, no clearance, and yet somehow taught him a lesson he never expected to hear again. "My dad always said, the best soldiers aren't the ones who know everything. They're the ones who never stop learning." The words stuck with him not just because of what they meant, but because of who had said them. He had spent over 3 decades building a reputation as the kind of leader who didn't tolerate failure or softness. His rise through the ranks was paved with control, precision, and a strict belief in chain of command. Children had no place in his world. Curiosity, inexperience, improvisation, those were risks, not strengths. But yesterday, Charlotte Monroe had unraveled that certainty with one twist of a hidden latch. Barrett didn't sleep well that night. He had reviewed her father's file, Captain Lucas Monroe, a decorated pilot who died 5 years prior during a humanitarian mission in Sudan. The man had written field reports laced with technical insights and handwritten side notes about how he couldn't wait to teach his daughters how to see the world in systems. What kind of man raises a child like that, Barrett thought. That morning, Barrett called Colonel Harlan to his office. She arrived, skeptical. "I owe you a briefing on yesterday's anomaly," he said stiffly, gesturing toward a manila folder on his desk. "But first, I want your honest opinion." Harlan didn't hesitate. "Sir, what Charlotte did wasn't just impressive. It was disciplined, focused. She followed every protocol she understood without ever being taught formally. That's not luck. That's legacy." Barrett looked down at the folder again. "I thought I understood legacy." "You do, sir," Harlan said. "You just forgot it doesn't always wear a uniform." Later that day, Barrett asked for Charlotte's mother, Dr. Evelyn Monroe, to meet him in the officers' lounge. She arrived guarded, expecting reprimands for her daughter's unauthorized movement on base. Instead, Barrett offered her tea. "I misjudged your daughter," he admitted, hands folded, voice steady, "and possibly your husband too. I didn't know Captain Monroe personally, but I've read his reports. I see now he didn't just serve well, he planted something in that girl most of us wouldn't recognize if it stood right in front of us." Dr. Monroe looked at him, wary but softened. "She's always been different," she said. "He taught her things I didn't even realize she remembered. But mostly, he taught her to think." Barrett nodded. "We could use more of that?" He paused, then handed her a letter, hand-signed, official. It was an invitation for Charlotte to attend the Wilmington Youth Innovation Program, a civilian-supported initiative on base offering hands-on STEM mentorship for children of service members. "It's not a recruitment tool," he clarified quickly. "It's a second chance, for me, for her, for this place to remember what legacy should really look like." Evelyn took the letter, holding back tears. Barrett watched her go, then turned back to the window. Outside, a group of young cadets passed in formation, eyes ahead, backs straight, minds full of lessons yet to be learned. And for the first time in years, Samuel Barrett hoped he might still have one left in him too. 2 weeks later, the Wilmington Crest Air Base looked different. Not in structure, the hangars still gleamed under the Arizona sun, the jets still roared across the sky, but in energy. There was a new buzz in the air, one that whispered of change, of possibility. And at the heart of it all was a little girl with oil-stained fingers and a mind wired for machines. Charlotte Monroe arrived on base that morning wearing a baseball cap her father once gave her, the one with a faded embroidered falcon stitched across the front. She clutched a brown notebook to her chest filled with drawings of flight control panels, hydraulic diagrams, and something she titled "Fixing Stuff When Adults Give Up." The Wilmington Youth Innovation Program, or WYIP, had just been revived after years of dormancy, quietly shelved in a dusty file cabinet until a certain 8-year-old reminded everyone that brilliance doesn't wait for permission. The program's new mission, to mentor the children of military families in science, mechanics, and systems thinking with guidance from engineers, pilots, and yes, even high-ranking officers who were once too proud to admit a child could teach them something. Brigadier General Samuel Barrett personally attended the launch. He didn't speak much, just stood near the edge of the makeshift workshop in Hangar 5, arms folded as usual, but eyes following Charlotte's every move, watching as she explained pressure valves to a group of older kids, then gently showed a shy 7-year-old how to draw a safety circuit diagram. She wasn't the loudest in the room. She didn't command attention, but somehow everyone leaned in when she spoke. After the morning session, Colonel Harland approached Barrett. "She's not just smart," the colonel said. "She's empathetic. She doesn't just solve problems, she brings people into the solution." Barrett nodded slowly. "Reminds me of someone I used to serve with in Kosovo. He fixed more conflicts with a chalkboard than most did with a weapon." "You thinking of mentoring a session?" Harland teased. He gave her a sideways look. "Don't push it." But later that week, Barrett surprised them all. He showed up in uniform not for inspection, but for instruction. He stood in front of the WEP class with a model cockpit panel and a faded story about a time in Baghdad when his own failure to adapt nearly cost a mission. The kids listened. Charlotte sat in the front row, and when he was done, he turned to her and said, "Miss Monroe, I believe you have something to add." She did. And together, they mapped out an emergency manual override system on the whiteboard, the child who opened the cockpit, and the general who finally opened his mind. As summer faded into fall, word of the program spread. Military families from neighboring states inquired about enrollment. Donations arrived from veterans groups. Even the Pentagon took notice. Charlotte received a letter not of invitation, but of appreciation signed by the Secretary of the Air Force. It didn't come with medals or demands, just 4 simple words. "You reminded us why." For Charlotte, the opportunity wasn't about glory. It was about learning, sharing, fixing things, and honoring the memory of her father, not by living in his shadow, but by walking in his light. As she and her mom drove home that evening, the Arizona sky painted itself in gold and crimson. Hannah, for once, looked up from her phone and whispered, "You really changed everything. You know." Charlotte smiled, resting her head against the window. "No," she said, "I just opened a door." Months passed. The air grew colder in Arizona's high desert, but inside Hangar 5, the warmth of ideas, teamwork, and laughter kept things alive. The Wilmington Youth Innovation Program had become more than a side project. It had evolved into a living tribute to legacy, potential, and quiet resilience. At the center of it all, Charlotte Monroe was no longer the little girl who opened the cockpit. She was now Coach Charlie to the younger kids and a respected peer to teenagers twice her age. Her hands had grown steadier, her voice more confident. Her once curious eyes now gleamed with quiet leadership. But it wasn't just Charlotte who changed. Brigadier General Barrett, once the embodiment of rigid tradition, had undergone a transformation of his own. At first, his presence at WYIP was symbolic. But then, something unexpected happened. He started enjoying it. He began arriving early, preparing materials himself. He even stopped barking orders and started asking questions, something his aides whispered hadn't happened in over a decade. He still stood tall, still wore the same stern expression, but something softer had bloomed beneath the surface. a seed planted by a child. One Thursday afternoon, after the day's session ended, Barrett stayed behind to help Charlotte recalibrate a mock fuel distribution system. The hangar was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of tools. "She reminds me of my granddaughter," he finally said. Charlotte looked up, surprised. Barrett rarely spoke of family. "She passed away when she was about your age. Cancer, brave kid, never let me see her cry. I guess." I closed off after that. Charlotte didn't say anything. She just nodded slowly, a gesture of understanding deeper than her years. Barrett looked at her hands, still small, but sure. "You opened more than a cockpit. Charlotte, you opened a door I didn't even know was still there." That moment marked something new between them. A bond, not just student and mentor, but co-healers of old wounds. At home. "Doctor." Evelyn Monroe noticed the changes in her daughter, too. Charlotte began taking initiative with chores, guiding her sister through math homework, and even fixing the family's broken toaster with nothing but a flashlight and a bent paperclip. She's always been bright, Evelyn told her therapist during a routine grief check-in. But now she's anchored, like she knows who she is and where she's going. Meanwhile, Hannah, the older sister who once rolled her eyes at everything Charlotte did, began to shift as well. Seeing her little sister command the attention of generals and engineers had sparked something in her. One day, she asked Charlotte to show her how to rewire a circuit. Another day, she shadowed a session and took notes. The ice between them slowly melted into mutual admiration. The program itself began to expand beyond technical training. It included ethics, storytelling, history classes that Barrett insisted on adding. Brilliance without empathy, he told the class one morning, is just another form of destruction. Charlotte wrote that quote down in her notebook. Beneath it, she added, Lesson 42, even generals can change. By winter's end, Charlotte was invited to speak at a military family conference in Colorado Springs. She stood on stage in front of hundreds, wearing her father's old pilot pin and a modest blue dress. Her speech was simple, heartfelt. "My dad taught me how to listen to machines, but this place, this program, taught me how to listen to people, even the ones who never thought they'd hear a child say something worth listening to." The crowd rose in applause. Somewhere in the audience, Barrett stood quietly, clapping with pride and maybe just a little awe. Spring arrived with a gentle breeze, and with it, a new ceremony was added to the Wilmington Crest calendar Legacy Day. It was General Barrett's idea, though he never took credit. The day was meant to honor service, sacrifice, and the spark of potential passed down from one generation to the next. The base had never hosted anything quite like it. There were no tanks rolling, no jets screaming overhead. Instead, children stood beside uniformed men and women, sharing stories, sketches, and science fair projects. Music drifted across the airfield from a string quartet formed by retired Air Force musicians. Tables overflowed with photos of parents lost in service, including one frame holding a picture of Captain Lucas Monroe, Charlotte's father young, smiling, helmet in hand. Charlotte stood beside that frame, now 9 years old, but taller somehow, not just in height and presence. She had been asked to close the event with a short speech. Her mother tried to offer help writing it, but Charlotte smiled and said, "I already know what I want to say." As she took the microphone, the sun dipped low, casting amber light across the crowd. Barrett stood in the front row, his arms at his sides, no longer crossed open. Charlotte took a breath. "When I was younger, like a whole year ago, I thought grown-ups always knew better. I thought important people had all the answers. I thought my hands were too small to do anything big." But then something got stuck. She smiled, letting the crowd chuckle. "A cockpit door wouldn't open, and when I fixed it, something else opened two people's eyes, their hearts, maybe even their minds. Some people didn't believe in me, and that's okay. Sometimes we don't believe in ourselves until someone else proves us wrong." She looked at Barrett then, just a glance, but he nodded. A full, silent acknowledgement. I'm not a genius. I don't have superpowers. I just remember what my dad taught me, that listening matters, that kindness matters, that small hands can still do big things if they're steady and full of purpose. Today isn't about me. It's about every kid whose heart races when they see a jet take off, or who wonders what gears make a door slide open, or who thinks maybe, just maybe, they have something worth sharing, even if their voice is small. Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we lift up. When she finished, there were no roaring cheers, only a deep, standing silence filled with tears, wonder, and pride. Then came the applause, slow, rising like a wave, until it swept the entire airfield in warmth. General Barrett stepped forward. He didn't salute. He didn't command attention. Instead, he pulled from his jacket a small velvet box and opened it in front of Charlotte. Inside was a custom medallion engraved with her name and the words inspiration, initiative, integrity. I had this made for someone who reminded an old soldier that courage comes in many forms, he said, and that sometimes it wears sneakers and a ball cap. Charlotte accepted it, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, sir. Barrett leaned closer. No, Charlotte, thank you. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon, Charlotte stood beside her mother and sister, watching the sky turn orange and gold. I wish Dad could have seen today, she said. Dr. Monroe put an arm around her. He did, sweetheart. You carry him in everything you do. Charlotte nodded. She didn't need to say more. Because that day, that speech, that smile, that spark wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legacy. Wilmington Crest Air Base. Once a place where rank ruled and rules rarely bent, now stood quiet in the golden hush of dusk. The buzz of jet engines had softened. The last folding chair from Legacy Day was packed away. And somewhere in the hangars, a child's forgotten notebook still lay open pages filled with sketches, circuits, and dreams. But something far greater had been left behind. A small girl with steady hands and a steady heart had reminded them all. Listening isn't a weakness, and brilliance doesn't always arrive in uniform. It began with a locked cockpit. It ended with unlocked hearts. And in between, a child helped reshape the way an institution and maybe a country saw what it meant to serve, to teach, and to grow. Not with commands, but with kindness, not through rank, but through respect. Charlotte Monroe didn't just fix a machine that day. She rewired a system and gave Legacy a second chance. The end. Up next, 2 more unforgettable stories are waiting just for you. If this one stayed with your heart, the next ones may stay with your soul. Tap to watch and don't forget to subscribe.